If you're watching this video, you probably want to get into VTubing and have incredible art skills or a passion to learn, but do not have the money or the knowledge necessary to make a host necessary to transfer your soul into the world of waifus and espandos. Or maybe you already have a 2D VTuber model, but want to get started into transporting your character to a shadow realm that is VR chat. A lot of tutorials have already simplified the creation of 2D avatars, but it's a surprise that not a lot of videos really try to break down the 3D meta for newbies who want to explore other options. Sure, apps like Vtuber Studio exist to introduce the option to those who don't know how to use Blender or Unity, but you and I may find that using Vtuber Studio is the equivalent to using GoAnimate to make quote-unquote animations. Sure, Vtuber can easily make models for you, but the tools and options they provide are very limited and do not do justice to the potential that 3D characters can look like. If you are one of the few people that want to explore the potential of 3D in a short amount of time, hi, my name is Morgan Osman, and I'm a 3D artist and animator that just started learning a 3D software and its fundamentals back in 2020 to make toon-shaded character designs, scenes, and even animated shorts. And while I'm not confident in the artistic skills that I possess right now, what I do have is a passion for the potential of what a merge of 2D and 3D can offer, including the VTubing industry. Or maybe I'm just a degenerate who saw the Jiggle physics of death itself, but hey, only one can wonder. Because of this, I have created 3 VRM models in the past, including the Wisdom model that you're seeing right now. But recently, I've live streamed the creation of a 4th model for the sole reason of recording every essential step to be taken, every hidden trick that I've discovered, every detail not talked about by many models in this genre, to present to you a detailed but concise log of what it takes to craft a living, animated being from the ground up. It's a very fun and interesting experience for me because as I work myself with this platform, I'm only able to create static content like pictures, GIFs, and videos. But it's only in rare occasions that I make dynamic content that dynamically changes based on the user's input. A great example of this type of content is the video game medium, but another example of these are VRM models, aka VTuber models, which takes into account the movement of the user in front of the camera in real time. The purpose of this video is to share a bite-sized version of the experience I had while making this VTuber model, so I'm going to warn you guys that I do not guarantee that you will possess the skills necessary to create a VTuber model by the end of this video. Instead, what I hope to achieve is to make the process easier for you to understand and point you guys in the right direction to make this journey of creation less blurry and more predictable. So with that being said, this is 3D VTuber model creation for dummies. Alright, let's cut to the chase. If you want to get into creating your first VTuber model, we need to map out the steps necessary to make one. As an experienced Blender user, my steps to making VTuber models is as follows. Step 1, making a reference sheet in a 2D program. Step 2, blocking out and sculpting my character. Step 3, Retopology. Step 4, texturing. Step 5, rigging. Step 6, adding shape case. Step 7, exporting to Unity. And Step 8, VRM conversion. For other 3D VTuber modelers like Sanjo, I realized that they actually replaced steps 2 and 3 entirely for a single step that I would like to call vertex by vertex modeling. I'll explain later why this can be hard and sometimes inefficient for beginners like you. So let's get into it. The first step is to doodle a reference sheet. I followed a suggestion online to make a collage of references first before making my character to have a better idea of what I want the final result to look like. I also followed the philosophy of Super iPass Wolf's video on good character design and Yam Alba's video on memorable VTuber design in making my character. Making sure a character's personality can be portrayed in mostly the top half of her design, using analogous colors to make her easy to the eye, and playing around with body proportions to the point that if you pick a silhouette of the 3D model, you will be mistaken to think that you're looking at a cactus. After careful planning, this is what I came up with. You can sort of tell that I'm not a good 2D artist because of these darn hands, and there are some details that have changed from this reference sheet after remaking it in Blender. But my goal at this point, as both the artist and rigger of this model, was not to make final design decisions, but to get a clear vision of what my character would look like to avoid any unexpected time-costing changes while still making it open to last-minute design decisions in a 3D software like Blender. I also went for a non-anime art style because I do want to make this as unique as I can and have my identity as the artist behind the work well known. I want to demonstrate that my process can be useful for other artists who may want to break away from the tropes seen in anime aesthetics and make more unique character design decisions to make it stand out in the genre that's already oversaturated as it is. Next thing is to move on to Blender and block out my character. Blocking out means breaking down your character to the simplest of mesh primitives like spheres, cubes, and quad spheres to serve as a foundation for creating a better shape via Blender sculpting tools. There are a lot of brushes and tools in Blender to make this process much more efficient, but the one option that I want to highlight here is that you can import your reference image files into the 3D scene as planes so you can have a side-by-side comparison of both your 2D and 3D characters' body proportions. You don't know how much having images next to your 3D model can benefit you, because it is easy for people like me to easily botch the measurements of your character. Sure, Blender does have a measuring tool, but unless you're familiar with the metric system and the simple idea of how long 1 meter really is, you may find the tool to be confusing to work with. Once I'm done blocking out, I smooth the edges of my model until what I get is a 3D sculpture of my 2D character. After sculpting your mesh, you may realize that you're working with a lot of polygons. If you're unfamiliar with 3D models, the mesh of a character consists of tiny little 2D polygons that the computer stitches together to make the fine details of your mesh. We call this elaborate framework of polygons its topology. A general rule of thumb is that usually, the more details a character has in terms of its shape, the more polygons that it has. But as a consequence, your computer will start to use too much of its power to even bring the model to your screen. So to compensate for this mess of a topology, you do what's called retopology, rebuilding the mesh from the ground up, or in this case, a simple plane. If you watch other VTubing 3D modeling tutorials, you may be more familiar with the step where an artist would actually start off by adding a single plane to an empty scene and slowly making more planes until what they get is an anime character. This is what artists like Sanjo uses to skip the sculpting process entirely, and while I do see how efficient and time-saving this method is, what really dismisses me from using this method is that if you're unfamiliar with the 3D space in Blender, it can be pretty easy for a model to look good on one side, but look weird looking at another side. I just find it easier if you already have an approximate 3D model to work with, like the one we've just sculpted, so that we can instead trace ourselves a new topology. And that is exactly what I did with this model. Using some of Blender's built-in tools like the snapping tool and the shrink wrap modifier, I was able to stick the corners of polygons to the surface of my heavily dense model to make a less detailed but PC-friendly model. I did sometimes use the classic method of making Vtuber models when creating the dress, the hat, and the scissor swords, but these are very simple things to make, and I've already gained enough experience in Blender to know the fundamentals of perspective. For the hair, I used Blender's automatic retopology tool, which lets me retopple already existing meshes with just a few clicks of a button. But I highly suggest you don't use this because you'll end up with topologies that don't deform well once you observe the movement of your VTuber model. I suggest using this tool sparingly on places where not so heavy movement occurs, like hair or custom accessories. I do want to mention that with whatever method of retopple you choose, you'll always end up with losing some detail in your shape. That's why it is a goal for a 3D artist like me to find a balance between efficiency and aesthetics. Luckily for us, the good thing about creating non-photorealistic models like VTubers is that it's easy to get away with losing a lot of these small details. Plus, with the shaders that we'll be using, it is hard to identify any small bumps or creases in skin, clothing, or accessories. With some design philosophies in VTubing, bumps or creases can even be considered too much detail for a character, and it's much more preferable to make very smooth surfaces in your character. If you really want to add these small details to your character, you may want to play with the eye of the viewer and use clever tricks and illusions to sell the presence of small details. For this to happen, you may need to focus less on the shape of your model and more on the next step, texturing. If you've ever wrapped a Christmas gift before, then you probably know the basics of 3D texturing. In a Christmas wrapping setting, your model is the unwrapped box, and the wrapping is a 2D image that you'll design on your own that will serve as its external appearance. But before you get into wrapping a Christmas gift, you'll first form jagged lines around the wrapping for cutting so that you can easily cover your gift without any crumples. This jagged line framework in 3D texturing is called a UV map, and they are basically 2D references that Blender uses to plan how an image texture would wrap around my 3D model. It is hard to explain how I make UV maps in Blender without derailing this video, but to summarize, I go into a mindset thinking that my model is already wrapped head to toe with wrapping paper. I would then mark out edges of my model in red that I would call the cutting lines. Essentially, by marking these lines in red, I'm telling Blender to cut these edges and lay the fallen pieces flat into a 2D image. It will trace the shape of these fallen pieces until I get the UV map that I wanted. Once I have the UV map, I can finally start coloring my Vtuber model. A good thing about Blender is that I can paint right into the 3D model itself. It will automatically change the appearance of the 2D image texture that it's referencing via the place of my strokes in relation to the UV map. It is in coloring the model that I add details that I lost while retopologizing, like creases on the dress, by adding fake shadows. Speaking of which, based on experience, adding fake shadows may be necessary because toon shaders of VTuber models may sometimes look flat despite support in casting shadows. This can be due to the angle of the light source found in the VTuber software that you'll be using, so it is best that you play to the advantage of toon shading and add these details on the texturing step instead. Oh, and speaking of detail, the resolution of your details is also equivalent to the resolution of your 2D texture. If you're using a 1920 by 1080 2D texture, you're probably going to get a standard high definition model, or maybe even less than that depending on how well you lay out your UV map. You may be compelled into using 2 or more image textures like mine, but keep in mind that by adding more textures, you will have to repeat some boring procedures when you finally export this to Unity. It doesn't really affect the quality of your model negatively, it just makes the process of creating your model a lot less convenient. Next up is rigging. Before making a rig, it is best that you have sculpted your model in a T-pose. This is because I'll be using an option in Blender that will automatically rig my character for me after creating the entire armature. However, this option would most likely result in unwanted areas being linked to a certain bone if not posed correctly. I found that T-pose is least likely to generate any of these errors, no matter how silly it may look, but I know that there are other poses that may work to the benefit of other character designs. For example, if your character has a wider chest, you may want to place the arms at a diagonal position for better deformation. I suggest you research and experiment on different base poses to see which one works best for you and your character. Now going back to automatic rigging, you may think that there is an option in Blender to manually rig the character, and there actually is. We call this weight painting. It is the process of drawing what looks like heat signatures or weights to a certain area of the model that will be assigned to a specific bone. To me, I just find this too long of a task to get through, especially when I need to assign weights to more than 70 bones, and some of the areas I need to paint may overlap with areas I want to leave at blue. I only use this as a correction tool after Blender creates the heat signatures for me via automatic rigging. Anyways, I found the option to automatically rig a character to yield, at worst, moderately satisfactory results. But if you want to fix up your rig yourself, the option is always there. Once you rig your character, you may want to add facial expressions, and this is where we start to learn about shape keys. Shape keys are temporary deformation changes from your base model that can be added or removed via a slider on the right side. I suggest you don't use this feature to move major body parts like arms and legs, because they are already assigned to the armature we made in the previous step. But for making expressions on the eyes and mouths, shape keys are just a tool that I need. Every shape key that I add to this box is equivalent to one facial expression, but it can also combine to make faces like this winking expression. With the Unity add-on that I'll be using, there are 12 key faces that I'll be making. The faces you make when you say the 5 vowel letters, an angry face, a sad face, a blinking face, a winking face for each eye, and a face for when you look left, and a face for when you look right. I can make more face expressions if I wanted to, and there is a use for shape keys aside from making facial expressions, but I'm too eager to finish my model at this point that I don't want to make any more detours from exporting the project into Unity. Now you might be wondering, Morgan, are you talking about the same Unity that people use to make video games? Yes, this is the same Unity engine that we are talking about, because much like video games, we will be compiling a bunch of scripts into our model so that it can move based on a user's input in the real world, which in this case is our movement in front of a camera. Luckily for us, neither you or myself need to learn any scripting language or compile any scripts, because you'll be using an add-on presented in this tutorial by Prechu called UniVRM. I'm going to leave the tutorial to set this up, as well as other tutorials to help me make this model in the first place down in the description of this video. But this UniVRM add-on essentially got me through converting this into VRM without learning much of Unity at all. So before I hop into Unity, I export my model in this armature as an FBX file, because this format is one of a few that's capable of storing texture data from my model. Then I import the FBX into Unity, wherein I tell the program which bones are assigned to the head, body, arms, and legs, and which textures go to which area. I export the model as a VRM model, but we're not done yet. I import the newly created VRM model to Unity, and the add-on would automatically compile a bunch of scripts for me in this right column. I go down to this blend shape script right here, and I assign the shape keys to each of the facial expressions given to me by the add-on. There are some facial expressions given to me by the add-on like fun and joy, but my model is already fun and joyous as it is, so I left these blank. After messing with the face, I went back to my scripts and added a blinker script. This is not a necessary step for you guys, it just gives me the option for my model to automatically blink to save on computer power. Once that is done, we'll get into creating the best part of them all, jiggle physics. When I was constructing my armature, I made sure to add bones in places that I want the jiggler to work a little in response to some primary movement like hair strands, sword, and, well, chest. In Unity, if we select the secondary bones option in this outline at the left side of the program, you get greeted by a new menu on the right side of the screen. Nothing to worry about here. The only option that I need to attend to is this root bone option. I type in the number of bones that I want to apply jiggle physics towards, then I list off the names of said bones. I suggest that before you even assign the bones, you should have given each of your bones a special name in Blender just to make the search for these bones in Unity much simpler. Once that's done, you can finally export the model one last time as a .vrm file and breathe a sigh of relief as you realize that you're finally done making your model. It's then time to import your model into a Vtuber software, and the results speak for themselves. The model I made works fine in the program that I'm using, VC Face. I did notice some texturing issues with my model, and I came to conclude that I should have maybe used more than 2 image textures when crafting the character in Blender. But if you look from afar, my model's not that bad, and accomplishes the style that I'm going for. Overall, I'm happy with how this came out, and I hope that you guys learn a thing or two about 3D VTuber model creation in this video. I will leave a list of video tutorials in the description that goes through the steps I've listed in more detail that may not be about VTuber making, but are general Blender and Unity tutorials that talk about the fundamentals of 3D character modeling that I find very helpful in making this specific model. It took me 1 year to learn how to get started with my first VTuber model. It took me another couple of months to create a model that I'm most comfortable with. But the reason it took me this long was because I didn't know where to find the right tutorial, and I was just being freaking lazy. With some determination and the information and steps set about in this video, I hope that aspiring artists and content creators will find it easier than me back then to get into the genre, and I only wish you guys the best. Because some side effects include parasocial relationships, doxing of your home address, unattainable body expectations, obsession towards content analytics, constant criticism from the public, an identity crisis, and existential depression. Dang, you guys are fucked in the head if you really want this in your life. Anyways, now go read a book.